Hello, Scream Hearts.
What's up, Hellions?
To another episode of Ghoul Talk with STEPH Infection and
ANNAHELLE.
What are we talking about today, ANNAHELLE?
June, as we all know it, is Pride Month, and here at HPUSA, we definitely support all of our communities. So we're totally joining in on supporting Pride and our LGBTQ plus creators, musicians, artists, people, and we know it's 365 days a year, but we're definitely allies.
As HPUSA, we support our LGBTQ community all year long, every day, but we highlight them at one of our shows, which is actually coming up at the State Theater, Havre de Grace, September 4th. It's HPUSA presents Pretty in Punk, where we highlight metal and punk bands that have a strong female and trans LGBTQ representation, and it's a lot of fun. We're still adding bands onto it. Again, it is September 4th at State Theater, Havre de
Grace, Maryland. That's such an awesome venue, too.
So far we have the NDD, who's from Philly, Voodoo Death Cult, also from Philly, Cherry Pops from New York, Lisa Christ Superstar, Philly, the Mary Lou's, who are from Jersey, and the Lousketiers, who are from New York. And we're still adding on bands. It's going to be like an all afternoon event. Come down. It's all ages. Get your tickets. Go on HPUSA events, Pretty in Punk. Get your tickets when they're available.
So today we're going to give a highlight reel. We'll have the discussion about queer horror. It definitely has a history to it. In talking to people and reading articles online, we've even learned a lot about this topic. On the Facebook HPUSA Horror Music and Movies group, we have the spot Fright on Pride horror, queer horror, anything in the LGBTQ community. This could include performers, actors, writers, directors. We're finding it has actually a very rich history, sometimes varied and sordid.
I'm actually glad, that we're even doing this, because I never knew the history. I knew that things weren't allowed to be said, just like a man and a woman couldn't be sleeping in the same bed in a TV show. Anyone couldn't be. There was a lot of rules on when it came to movies and TV shows back in the day, but I actually never understood why until I started reading about the LGBTQ community and writers in the movie industry. It was called the Hays Code. They couldn't talk about it, they couldn't show it, and it wasn't necessarily banned completely, but you couldn't show it in a positive manner. A lot of cool undertones and subtext, even in the 30s. Some of them that you should check out. Maybe you'll look at it a little bit differently now when you see them.
I think the big one in the 30s that definitely comes to mind is director Whale. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man. He was actually openly gay in Hollywood, and that didn't even hurt his career or his success at a time when people were much less open, obviously, when people were persecuted, and they still are. We still have a long way to go. Just fantastic reading about his contributions. And I think a lot of the things with the monsters is that idea of the other. Yes. And they're different, and they're outcasts in society. A lot of people we were reading would connect with that sort of thing.
Even in like Dracula's Daughter, she wants to get her impulses out.
And she will go after men or women. And there's a famous scene where the lady is like laying on the couch, and Dracula's daughter, Maria, very like seductively kind of goes into for the feed. The whole idea of vampirism is definitely sexual and seductive.
I think that was like the starting point, because later on there was an explosion of vampire
lesbian vampires of the 1970s.
But this was kind of like the first, I feel like you're really seeing it in the 30s. And they even had a point where I think she spoke to a therapist.
They tried to do like the conversion therapy. They would have women, not only women, but homosexual, bisexual, etc. Anything outside of the cis heterosexual people, they would try to do that therapy. Like therapy would cure everything.
I heard that was a play on what was really going on in real life, and what he was seeing as a writer and everything in his daily life. But
in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all of these representations are being hailed as like queer subtext. The character is not overt. And especially now, looking back with a modern lens, modern sensibilities, you can definitely see that. I think another one that's really highlighted is the creature from the Black Lagoon.
yes,
1954, which we've talked about this, our Monster Love series. It's all these guys going on this secluded boat ride,
and they're skinny dipping together, and
the whole thing. And when they encounter like the creature, it is this large phallic symbol. Like if you look at his little head, actually, now that I'm thinking about it,
it's been said many places that it actually is like that, and they were attracted to that. Again, if you read up on these, it's all undertones. You don't want to read too much into it, but when you actually hear what they were about and why the writers wrote them, you understand that they were just trying to get their stories out, and people were attracted to monsters at that time. In the 60s, Hays Code's gone. First movie, 1960, that we have is Psycho, which obviously shows the struggle and goes actually deeper than just a horror film. He is struggling and completely going mad with his deviant lifestyle and gender confusion. It's another shine on people go through being born one way and not feeling that way. In the 60s, being a cross-dresser was very, taboo still. We have this man that is struggling, and you kind of feel for him, even though he does some crazy things.
This is a great example. When that true self is squashed down, then violent tendencies happen.
Exactly.
When you deny yourself, that's when you start to have issues. And that, to a lot of people, is what Pride is about, your true self.
I totally agree.
We get to the 1970s, and
Hays Code actually was no more in 1968. So 70s, everyone let loose, and you can see it in the cinema.
Reflected in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
Cinema is what you're seeing in real life. We're getting women's lib. In the 60s, we were doing civil rights. All these groups and communities of people fighting for their rights, fighting to be seen.
It was a huge liberation for all quote unquote different people that felt that they couldn't be themselves, and people that felt that they were persecuted for who they were. So it was a big time. And obviously, we've said it before, we still have so long. Yeah. But it was a great, from reading and seeing what people went through, and they actually felt free to write what they wanted to write and put things in movies that they wanted to. It was great. It's a great time.
Perfect example of that. Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975. Yeah. If you're not familiar with this film, get familiar with this film. And I think one of my favorite mixings is horror and macabre with a musical. And great. This is great because it wasn't crazy widely received. It's definitely become more popular now than when it first was. But this movie also invited you, like in showings or where you see if you see it live, like the play, or the audience participates.
Yes.
Is a huge part of it. And we have Dr. Frankenfurter, who's a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania. Pool orgy. The whole, that's probably one of the most memorable scenes in cinema.
The Hays Code was abolished in 68. And then, there were fights going on. Like, people did not want this. Writers, people in the movie industry, they did not want this. In 1975, here's Rocky Horror Picture Show. Bam, in your face.
There was a lot of gender expressions, a lot of sexuality, the spectrum. And that's what we like.
Then we get to the 80s, you had the AIDS crisis. So where we had the 70s as like a liberation time, the 80s kind of with the AIDS crisis, being homosexual almost became taboo again, and people were scared, and it was
a huge stigma.
Yes, there was still a lot of queer activity going on in movies like Sleepaway Camp, and we have Fright Night where he's obsessed with the guy instead of his girlfriend and all this stuff. But one that actually stuck out to me, and just seeing how even writers that were openly gay struggled, was Freddy's Revenge, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. David Chaskin is an openly gay screenwriter, and it was always talked about that Jesse, the final boy in this movie, was in the closet and there were a lot of gay undertones. He just didn't come out. There was even a point where he meets his male gym teacher in a gay bar. And when asked about it, it was obvious to everyone, but he denied it. And then finally, decades later, he felt comfortable enough to say that's exactly what he was writing about.
Yeah.
So even at a time where you think there was just this liberation and we can write it and make movies about whatever we want, then we have a crisis going on that's affecting that community, within 15 years. And he didn't feel comfortable coming out and saying that's actually what he was writing about decades later, multiple. So, and I love that movie. Seeing the progression of each decade and what our LGBTQ community has struggled to go through.
Especially with positive representation, because a lot of times, it went back to the gay, lesbian, or trans person is the villain or like the murderer or has the weird obsession. Like they were still being painted as this outsider, this villain. Flash forward to the 90s. I think we all remember Silence of the Lamb and Buffalo Bill. It's obviously suspense. It's obviously like serial killer and these horror topics, but it's so widely critically acclaimed, which the Academy, as it's called, often, denies horror movies on, the awards on the base fact that it's horror. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this one kind of got, I guess, under that radar. Buffalo Bill, there's a lot of trans misogyny and transphobia.
The antagonist. He was also a little bit lovable. It was like one of those, like, we want to hate him, but we don't kind of people. He's like a very lovable character when it comes to horror movies.
And I think that's a mark of good writing as well, to be doing obviously these atrocious acts, but we still all make memes and love and repeat, we quote them all the time.
It puts the lotion on the skin.
Another big one from the 90s, Interview with a Vampire. Tom Cruise is Lestat and Brad Pitt is Louis. And Tom Cruise turned him, and vampirism, again, is super sexual, sensual, all of that. Like the whole idea of anyone biting anyone else's, I guess, part of body. Does it have to be the neck? A lot of movies show the arm, like the forearm.
Yeah,
but it's gotta be a major vein. I
think back in the day, it was that your neck, your vein on your neck. So they would go for that, which is sexual in nature. Anyway,
oh, yeah.
Someone's neck.
Definitely. And to have, it's the 90s, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and then Antonio Banderas is in there, are arguably like the sex symbols of the 90s at that time. And the undertones of all their dialogue, like clearly Lestat turned Louis and he's pissed, and they turn a little girl. So we have like my two dads raising little girl vampire. Nobody has a problem.
It showed their support for the community also.
Yeah.
Now we get into the 2000s, which it's becoming more of a proud moment. Even in TV, you had like Will and Grace and shows like Ellen DeGeneres coming out, and it was just so much more widely accepted. Tons of movies, but one that kind of struck everyone as a little bit shocking was The Seed of Chucky. Glenn or Glenda, which are the two names of Chucky and Tiffany's offspring, as a non-binary child, but it's also a doll that's struggling with their gender and what to actually be. And it was kind of chaotic. And so you have you have these two killer dolls, and their offspring is trying to sort out their gender identity. And I don't really ever remember a movie showing this.
Right.
All that. And it's real, and it was happening for ever. But now we kind of have this horror film, and it's happening with dolls. And I recently saw that you posted a article on Don Mancini, which is the originator and screenwriter, and his history with himself and even Child's Play, the original.
He did a panel a couple years ago at San Diego Comic-Con, and he talked about, he's the screenwriter, he's the total creator of the Child's Play franchise, and it was a lot like growing up with a single mother and also, you know, struggling and coming to find his identity as a gay man. He's admitted those kind of ideas and subtext into the movies.
Things that he struggled with even as a child, friends, everything, you know, it kind of all comes into play. Child's play.
Obviously, we're blessed with Jennifer Tilly, one of our queer icons for sure. Check out any of her interviews or anything. Like, she's awesome. Like, we've already professed our love for Jennifer Tilly in anything.
Seriously, I love her so much.
Yeah, can we get her on Ghoul Talk? Like, who do we know? Can we get her on Ghoul Talk?
Can we get Jennifer Tilly? Gina, all right, call her her people.
Yeah,
set it up.
We need her. So we get on to the 2010s and up to now, and the consensus is we could use more positive queer role models in horror. With independent film, we are getting a lot more goods in that era. Is a real standout for the 2010s is The Babadook from 2015. But it was listed under Netflix's LGBTQ category. Been a lot of gay activity on Tumblr advocating for the Babadook as a queer icon. He's got his own pop-up book and he's super dramatic, and the way he dresses, the writers at Vulture was like, he wears a long androgynous coat that a certain type of fashion gay might lust over. So the Babadook has definitely been claimed as a gay icon by the community, which is definitely cool. Stories about a single mom and a kid, and you get like the queer subtext. So if you're watching and paying attention, people are like, he's gay, he's with us, like, let's go.
So actually there was a writer that even stated that in 2017 he wrote, "This year the B in LGBTQ stands for Babadook. Happy Pride." So I was that was great to see. So he's accepted by all. This is a positive note to kind of leave on. Our movies are just progressing and getting better into representation of all types. We stand by it. We want it. Be proud of who you are.
Okay, Hellions.
All right, Scream Hearts, that's another episode of Ghoul Talk Down. Thank you for joining us. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to HPUSATV. Happy Pride to everyone in the community. We support you. We love you. Be yourself. Raise those flags high.
Make sure that if you haven't already, you join the Facebook group for HPUSA Horror, Music, and Movies, where we are using the hashtag Pride Horror to really put the spotlight on creators, writers, directors, actors, the queer community, LGBTQ plus community, put the spotlight on Pride Horror. Definitely join the conversation. I'm learning a lot. Like there was some stuff I knew and a lot of stuff I didn't, and it's really been fantastic and things I love. I'm really happy to support and be an ally.
Yeah, so this episode was obviously more of like a history kind of progression of where we are, but I'm sure there are so many LGBTQ writers that and actors and movies that we don't even know, or stories, everything, TV shows, horror related. I watched Lucifer now. That's got a ton of stuff in. We're getting better, but this is the progression, and you can actually see how hard it was, and it's getting better and it's getting easier. So put anyone that you know that you would love for us to spotlight on our page in the comments. And also don't forget to come out for Pretty and Punk at State Theater Habit Grace September 4th, where we spot strong female and LGBTQ representation in our musicians and bands. So please come out.
Watch out for each other out there, okay?
All right, till next time, Scream Hearts.
Later, Hellions.